Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's seminar. Today, we are very much honored to have Dr. Lai Chun to give us a talk. Before her talk, may I introduce her to you? Dr. Lai Chun holds a PhD in educational psychology and educational technology at Michigan State University. She is the head of academic unit of language and literacy education and an associate professor at the Faculty of Education, the University of Hong Kong. Her research interests are technology and language education, with a special focus on technology-enhanced language learning beyond the classroom. Her current projects include investigations into language teachers' digital bridging initiatives that connect in-class and out-of-class language learning. Without further ado, may I invite Dr. Lai to give us a talk on understanding self-directed out-of-class language learning with technology. Now I give the floor to you, Dr. Lai. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Song, for the nice introduction. Let me share my screen first. Okay.
By the way, please conduct the survey after the talk. Thank you very much. Okay. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem at all. Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to the webinar. And so in today's session, I'm going to walk you through some of the studies on self-directed language learning with technology beyond the classroom. Now, by self-directed, I mean learner-initiated, learner-directed learning experience. By technology, I mean the technological resources that students have access to in their daily life. So basically, this body of literature are interested in understanding learner-initiated, learner-directed, incidental, and intentional language learning with everyday technological resources beyond the classroom. Now, why am I so interested in learning beyond the classroom? As we all know that second language development is undergoing a major shift, especially with the omnipresence of technology in daily life. Now, second language development is increasingly taking place outside the institutional settings, predominantly through the use of online networks and online media. Because this language learning beyond the classroom has become a very common, commonplace, scholars are directing increasing interest in understanding what's really going on out there. And this increasing scholarly interest can be reflected on two recently published handbooks. One is the Handbook of Informal Language Learning by Dressman and Sandler, and another is the Routledge Handbook of Language Teaching and Learning Beyond the Classroom, co-edited by my colleagues and me. So why this increasing interest in learning beyond the classroom? There has been empirical and also curriculum argument. Now let's look at the empirical argument first. One of the similar study by Cole and Vanderplank, 2016, they studied Brazilian university English language learners. Now they identified two groups of university English language learners. One group had less than 1 year formal English instruction inside the classroom. They call this group fully autonomous self-instructed learners. And there's the other group who had more than 4 years of in-class English learning experience. Thus, they were called classroom-trained learners. So the researchers tested the two groups of students on 6 dimensions of linguistic knowledge and skill, including literal reading, figurative reading, lexical resource, grammatical accuracy, vocabulary grammar, and grammatical judgment test. What they find is that the fully autonomous self-instructed learners consistently outperformed the classroom-trained learners across all the 6 dimensions. And they find the difference across those two groups are statistically significant. Furthermore, they find that for the fully autonomous self-instructed learners, the more time they spend learning English, the higher their performance were. And for the classroom-trained learners, the more time they spent with informal sources, the higher their performance was. So basically, those findings establish the link between learners' out-of-class experience and their overall language proficiency. Now let's move on to look at vocabulary. Now, Peters et al. 2019, they studied Flemish language learners. Now, in Belgium, people study French earlier than they study English inside the classroom. So they identified 3 groups of language learning: secondary 2, secondary 4, and university. For secondary 2 students, they have had 1 year English learning experience, 6-year French learning experience. For secondary 4, 3-year English, 6-year French, and for university, 6-year English and 9-year French. And they tested the students on their vocabulary knowledge across different vocabulary frequency level. Now let's take secondary 2 as example. What they find is that those learners' English vocabulary size were significantly larger than their French vocabulary size across all the frequency levels. And the same pattern stood for secondary 4 students and for university students. So this is kind of counterintuitive, as the students have been studying French inside the classroom much longer than they have been studying English inside the classroom. To resolve this puzzle, they surveyed the students' exposure to the language outside the classroom. What they find is that those learners accessed audiovisual resources, written media, online gaming, and language website more frequently in English than they do with French. Thus, the researchers conclude that the learners' out-of-class exposure to the language might have contributed to their vocabulary knowledge. Now, moving on to reading, Breivik 2019 identified a group of 11th graders at a school in Norway, and they call this group of learners the outliers. Outliers in the sense that those students scored below the 20% benchmark in the Norwegian test, but 60% or above in the English test on a national reading test. So basically, this is a group of learners whose reading proficiency in the second language was higher than the reading proficiency in their native language. Now, to understand the reason behind it, the researchers surveyed those students on the exposure to the 2 languages outside the class. So the green bar stands for the exposure in English, and the blue bar stands for their exposure in Norwegian, their native language. What they find is that those students had more access to English novels, cartoons, news, music, TV series, and movies, and online games in English than they do in native language Norwegian. The researcher argued that because those learners were engaged in multimodal reading in online game, and also because the TV series and social media texts are characterized by classical narrative structure, exposure to those narrative structure beyond the classroom might have transferred to the reading performance test performance. So what does it mean? It means that learners' out-of-class experience might also relate to their reading performance or the reading development. So those studies have established the potential link between learners' exposure to the language beyond the classroom and their language development. And then researchers move on to look at what are the relative contribution of learners' in-class experience and their out-of-class experience. Now, Duvaldi et al. 2021, they studied middle school students in Finland. They find, not surprisingly, the amount of English instruction significantly impacted the students' overall proficiency, their speaking skill, and their receptive vocabulary knowledge. However, once they put in the English knowledge those students acquired outside school before the classroom instruction into the model, they find that the amount of English instruction no longer was significant. So what does it mean? It means learners' out-of-class experience might have overshadowed the effect of in-class English learning to their language development. Similar studies have been reported in different parts of the world, such as Taiwan, in this case, 11th graders in Taiwan, where they find that the amount of formal English instruction was significantly associated with learners' listening comprehension and their oral proficiency in terms of fluency and accuracy. However, they find that the strongest influence on their language outcomes was a measure of the learner's current contact with English outside school. Similarly, in the European context, with adolescents in 14 European member states, what they find is that, again, school factor positively associated with the development of various English skills, especially for learners where their native language were linguistically distant from English. However, what they find is that factor related to students' out-of-class exposure played an even more important role in the development of English skills, regardless of the linguistic distance between the learner's native language and English. So those studies establish that both in-class and out-of-class language exposure contributes to the language development. However, students' out-of-class experience sometimes may overshadow the effect of their in-class learning. Again, the researcher move on to look at what are the potential influence of learners' out-of-class experience on their in-class learning. So basically, they're arguing that learners have rich and engaging exposure to the language beyond the classroom. How would this rich experience influence learners' motivation in in-class English learning? Now, some of the researchers are optimistic. They feel that learners' out-of-class experience might positively contribute to their motivation for in-class English learning because they feel that those engaging experience would increase learners' curiosity about the language, increase their motivation for learning the language, and keep them more confident and give them a general feeling of being at ease with the spoken language. That's contributes positively to learners' motivation for learning inside the classroom. However, other groups of scholars are pessimistic, while they feel that because of those engaging experience beyond the classroom, that may cause this authenticity gap that students may perceive for their in-class learning. Basically, they would perceive in-class learning was boring, right, compared to what's going on in the digital world. So those scholars argue that when students realize the benefits of informal contexts, they may turn against the institutional language. Thus, there were contradictory hypotheses about the potential influence of learners' out-of-class experience on their in-class learning. To resolve these contradictory hypotheses, Lam and Arisati conducted a study to look at the potential influence of or correlation between learners' out-of-class experience and their motivation for in-class learning. So they studied 3 types of out-of-class learning experience. One is entertainment-oriented out-of-class experience, basically listening to songs, watch movies and TV shows, etc. Socially oriented out-of-class experience, that is to use social media and instant messaging for socialization purposes. Self-instructed out-of-class experience, using apps like vocab app or grammar sites to study the language perceived. So what they find is that all the 3 types of out-of-class language exposure correlates positively with students' self-reported language proficiency. More importantly, they find that the 3 types of out-of-class experience correlates positively with students' general motivation for learning the language and also with their ideal L2 self. Basically, ideal L2 self is learners' future aspired future self in relation to the language, whether they can envision using the language in future life, future work, future study, etc. So they find that the more students spend time engaging in those entertainment, socially oriented, instructional out-of-class exposure to the language, the higher they may likely to feel their aspired future self in relation to the language. Furthermore, they find socially oriented out-of-class experience and self-instruction out-of-class experience correlates positively with students' attitudes to in-class English learning. Thus, there has been a rich body of literature establishing the empirical link between out-of-class technological experience and language development. They further showed that the effects of this type of technological experience may sometimes overshadow the effects of in-class instruction for language development. Furthermore, they feel that learners' out-of-class technological experience may influence learners' motivation for in-class language learning. Now, with those empirical arguments, let's move on to look at the curriculum arguments. Now, for the curriculum arguments, scholars were arguing that learners' out-of-class experience is qualitatively different from their in-class experience. Thus, language curriculum needs to pay more attention to what's going on beyond the classroom. Now, take this particular study as example. In this study, we interviewed a group of students. foreign language learners at the University of Hong Kong, their experience inside the language classroom and their experience outside the language classroom, and how they perceive the contribution of those two experiences to their language development. According to the students, they feel that their in-class learning experience helped them learn the fundamentals of the language, keep them focused, and persevere in learning the language. Whereas they feel that their out-of-class experience served different functions in terms of maintaining their motivation and interest in learning, and help them see how the language is actually used, hence establish a stronger sense of the language, and also be able to do something that you're not able to do a few months ago in the language, give them a sense of accomplishment and boost their self-efficacy. Thus, they feel that their out-of-class experience served as this kind of self-assessment tool that helped them set goals for further study. Furthermore, they feel that this experience established a sense of connection with peer learners and the target culture. Thus, according to those learners, their in-class and their out-of-class learning served different yet complementary functions to their language development. Furthermore, scholars like Gottman-Jones, they further argue that the language skill set that students can pick up inside the classroom experience and from the out-of-class experience might be qualitatively distinct as well. They feel that in-class experience expose students to conventional literacy skill, whereas students are able to acquire sophisticated, pragmatic, and sharpen their critical reading capabilities through their out-of-class experience. Thus, they argue because of this qualitatively different nature, it's important to pay attention to what's going on outside the classroom when we develop the language curriculum. Furthermore, some researchers challenge us to rethink about the purpose of language learning. Like Wagler argued that learning is bound to participation in the live world. Then this is also true for second language learning. And so the purpose of learning a second language basically is to enable the students to engage in social participation in the target language. If that is the true, then what's going on inside the classroom needs to help our second language learners to be able to perform that, to participate in the new areas of their second language life world. Following this line of thinking, scholars are arguing that we may need to flip the coin. By flipping the coin, they mean that repositioning the role of in-class learning and out-of-class learning. Now, conventionally, we always think that out-of-class learning serves in-class learning. So basically, inside the classroom, the teachers guide the students to acquire what they feel they need to learn. And then out of the classroom, students practice and consolidate what they have learned inside the classroom. Now, if the purpose of learning a second language is to empower the students to perform social functions in the target language, then we need to think about repositioning in-class learning as serving out-of-class learning. So basically, classroom should become this place where we curate what's going on beyond the classroom, engage students to reflect on their language use beyond the classroom, and also guide the students to do elaborated analysis and study of the language use beyond the classroom, so as to help students develop the meta-linguistic and meta-cognitive strategies in handling what's happening and what happened in the second language world. And furthermore, scholars are arguing that language learning is not just accumulation of linguistic knowledge that enables students for social function. More importantly, language also is a tool for voice, for action, for empowerment that enable learners to counter the societal discrimination, societal bias, and injustice. Now, in this case, the language learning basically inside the classroom needs to prepare students to be able to use the language as a transformative agents for societal transformation. Now, all those arguments highlight the importance to pay attention to what's going on beyond the classroom when we plan language curriculum. So both the empirical and the curriculum arguments highlights that out-of-class learning experience contributes significantly to students' language development and should not be ignored. And because of this, scholars are arguing that teachers play a very important role to proactively interface formal and informal language learning. To put in Harvard's words in 2020, basically, he said, if we are truly preparing both language teachers and language students to be lifelong learners, then a much more substantial part of the typical language course experience should be devoted to nurturing informal learning than is currently the case. Researchers further argue that researchers and educators and teachers must consider the different ways in which their students could imagine engaging with the world beyond the context of classroom. Not only scholars argue that teachers need to play a role, students also expect teachers to play a role in interfacing formal and informal learning. Now, in one of the studies we conducted with university foreign language learners, we elicited students' reflection on the type of support that their teachers provided them that contributes to their informal technological engagement for language learning. And those learners some basically reflect on three types of support. One is effective support, encouragement, recommendation to encourage students to engage in such activity. Capacity support, cognitive, metacognitive strategies that safeguard the effective interaction with the digital resources. Behavioral support, that is teachers' incorporation of technological resources inside in-class instruction to model the interaction with technological resources or incorporate technological resources in out-of-class assignment. They feel that all three types of teacher support contributes positively to their informal technological use for language learning, but through different routes. For effective support, it influenced technological use via perceived usefulness. For example, this particular learner was saying that when the teacher constantly encouraged them to use digital resources beyond the classroom, he would approach the resource with greater consciousness of learning because he perceived usefulness. In the past, I listened to songs totally for fun, but quit it whenever I lost interest. Now I treat it more seriously. And capacity support was also found to contribute positively to informal digital use via perceived availability of the support for such behavior and also boosted self-efficacy. For example, this Japanese learner talked about her Japanese teacher reminded them of the formality and informality of the Japanese used in some movies and TV shows. And because of this, he paid more attention to the language when he watched movies and consciously compared the language used in the movie with the language they learned in class. So he said, I would bring the language I picked up in the movies to class to check with the teacher because of this perceived availability of support. And furthermore, behavioral support also influenced informal digital use through boosted self-efficacy. For example, this beginner German learner talked about her German teacher bring German songs into their beginner German class. He said, after listening to those songs and watching the lyrics, we found that we could understand some of them. We would be more confident. So we'd go back to search for the singer's other songs that the teacher didn't play in class. Thus, studies show that teachers could and should play an active role to support students out of class learning. Then the question becomes, how can or should formal language instruction take the new opportunities for informal learning into account? Now, to conceptualize the how, one way to think about it is that teachers can play a very important role to support students' informal digital engagement so as to enrich learners' learning experience, basically to enhance the quality of students' informal digital experience. Now, how to do this? Let's look at one of the study. In one study I conducted with, again, foreign language learners at university on the relationship between their language belief and their engagement in formal digital experience. Let's take this particular German language learner as example. This German language learner has been studying German for 3 years. So she has reached intermediate German level. However, she believed if she couldn't fully understand something, she would not be interested in that. And so basically, she has a very low tolerance of ambiguity in the language input she got exposed to. And because of the language learning belief, and she exhibited engagement with a narrow set of digital resources, such as, according to her, online dictionary is the most important resource. And she also used German listening packs which is a companion to the German textbook. Sometimes she listened to YouTube songs as well. Now let's look at this French language learner who has only been studying French for 1 year, but she doesn't really mind if she couldn't understand. She just wants to immerse in the language environment. Because of this language learning belief, she would immerse herself in French movies despite the linguistic challenges. Thus, we can see when the students hold different beliefs, they may selectively engage with different technological resources beyond the classroom. Furthermore, we also found that learners' belief also shapes how they approach and interact with the digital resources. Say, the Spanish learner, he believed in the importance of accuracy in the language output because she felt embarrassed if she couldn't use correct language. But at the same time, she also believed in holistic approach to language learning. That is, language is acquired through using the language. Now, because of this belief on acquiring language through using the language, she would still actively seek opportunities to interact with others in Spanish, despite her concern over accuracy. And according to her, her concerns over accuracy didn't put her off from doing this. Rather, this concern shaped how she interacts in such activities. She said, when I converse with others in Spanish, I would avoid using new language, new vocabulary, or complicated sentences. I would use familiar vocabulary when conversing in Spanish, but I would still do that because I believe in a holistic approach to language learning. Thus, this particular study found that language learning belief shape learners' selection of technological resources outside the classroom, and also shaped the approaches that the students adopt in interacting with technological resources. This study further revealed that learners' technological behavior beyond the classroom over time may shape their language learning beliefs, and the dialectic relationship between learners' language learning belief and their out-of-class technological experience were moderated by learners' motivation, agency, their interest, their perceived affordance of the technological resources, how learners position the technological experience, and the perceived support in the technological experience. So basically, what does this study inform us? It suggests that in order to support students' informal digital engagement, teachers play a very important role in fostering beliefs and mindset that are facilitative of learners' informal digital experience. Now, how about another role, recommending resources? Is it possible to identify a set of digital resources that are facilitative of language development and recommend to the students? Now, researchers have been explored the possibility. Now, take this particular study as example, Duvaldi 2020. They looked at different out-of-class activities and how they relate to learners' language proficiency. They look at social media, playing games, speaking the language, and the TV, watching TVs with or without subtitle, and listening to English songs. What they find is when taking all those activities into account, they find social media, playing games, speaking English contributes significantly and positively to learners' overall language proficiency. But listening to songs contributes negatively to learners' overall language proficiency. However, in their study, they also find it's not that simple, because for the same type of technological activity, it may relate to different language skills differently. So for example, they find playing English game contributes positively and significantly to speaking and learners' receptive vocabulary size. However, it has no relationship with learners' reading comprehension, writing, and the listening comprehension. Thus, the study suggests that it's not clear-cut whether a particular technological resource is beneficial for language development. It depends on what language skill or linguistic knowledge we're looking at. Furthermore, this body of literature reviewed some even contradictory findings. Take Duvaldi et al. 2022 and Peters 2019 as example. Both studies examined Dutch-speaking children in Flemish primary schools who had no formal instruction in English. And both studies want to look at the link between learners' out-of-class exposure to English and their English receptive vocabulary knowledge. DeWelde et al. Find that reading, listening to music, using social media, and speaking were significant predictors of learners' receptive vocabulary knowledge. However, watching TV and gaming were not significant predictors of learners' receptive vocabulary knowledge. However, Plumage and Peters come up with the totally opposite finding. What they find is that only the gaming and TV viewing were significant predictors of those children's receptive vocabulary knowledge. How come the same technological resources turned out to be drastically different in terms of their efficacy towards language development? Now, Sundquist study might shed some insight on this. Sundquist basically studied different types of gameplay. So they compared the productive vocabulary knowledge across different game pleasures. Now, the non-gamers who don't play game at all, single player who play standalone computer games, multiplayer who play games together with others in the same space, and massive multiplayer online role-playing games. Those who from different parts of the world gather together on the same online gaming space. To interact with each other. So basically, they find that students who engage in collaborative gameplay showed better, higher productive vocabulary size than those who never play or those who only play standalone game. And they found the same pattern for receptive vocabulary knowledge as well. So Sundquist basically concluded that it is not whether playing computer games contributes to language development. It is rather how learners interact with the technological resource that matters. In the case of gameplay, the scale of social interaction matters. The higher the social interaction is during the gameplay, the more beneficial it is to English vocabulary development. Thus, those studies suggest the search for a robust toolkit of technological resources that would work for all may not take us far because the efficacy of digital resources depends on the particular language skill we are looking at and also depends essentially on how learners interact with the technological resources. Now, if this route is not workable, then what can teachers do? Now let's look at this particular study with middle school students in mainland China, where we elicit students to reflect on the different types of activities they engage out of the class that give them exposure to English or benefits their English study. And then we coded the activities the students reported into form-focused and meaning-focused activities. By form-focused activity, we mean when students were using the digital tools, that basically their primary attention is on the language form, say, for example, vocab app or grammar sites. But then for many focused activity were the activities where the primary focus is on the meaning. So what we find is that the variety of meaning-focused activity types significantly predicted students' English grade, their confidence in learning the English, and the English enjoyment. Similar study has been reported in Korean with Korean university students, where the quantity of out-of-class exposure to the language contributes significantly to confidence and enjoyment in English learning, whereas the diversity of learners' out-of-class experience contributes to their TOEFL score, their speaking proficiency, their productive vocabulary size. So both studies point out that when the in-class instruction is characterized by a heavy focus on language forms, the degree to which the out-of-class learning activity focus on meaning and complement in-class learning experience is indeed an important characteristic of quality out-of-class learning experience. Thus, what does this suggest us? As a teacher, one important role teacher may play is to support the students to diversify their learning experience, especially in relation to the characteristics of the in-class learning. And furthermore, look at this particular study where we engage the students to keep a technology activity diary for 1 month, where they record the technological resources they use and when, where they use it, and the specific topic, content, and material they used, the duration of the activity, the attentional focus, and whether they did anything with the vocabulary in the material when they interact with the resource. So they keep this diary for 1 month, and they will analyze their diary entry and correlates with their vocabulary score. Well, we find that there is a minimal relationship between the number of digital resources that students use and the vocabulary score. However, it is the learner's attentional focus and how they interact with the language during the interaction that correlates positively with vocabulary score. Specifically, we find balance of multimodal resource. That is, when the students use the digital resource, do they pay attention to the multimedia information? So for example, when they're listening to songs, do they only listening to the songs, or do they listen to the songs and watch the lyrics together? And dual attentional focus, basically, do they pay both attention to the meaning and the language form when they interact with the digital resource? Depth of lexical information, do they pay attention to the vocabulary? If they do they pay attention to only the meaning, or do they also pay attention to the usage? Involve the node, basically, do they notice the vocabulary? Do they search for the meaning of the vocabulary? Do they consciously compare and evaluate different meaning of the vocabulary or different usage of the vocabulary? So we found that those 4 indicators were significantly differentiate the learners with higher vocabulary knowledge from those with lower vocabulary knowledge. What does this suggest? It suggests that teachers play a very important role to enhancing students' strategic engagement with the digital resources when they interact with those resources. And in a recent study with university EFL learners, we want to examine the 2 fundamental pillars of self-direction. Now, as scholars have pointed out, self-direction in technology-mediated informal learning context involve 2 aspects. One is initiating and designing a personalized learning environment and trajectory, basically students' capacity of constructing their learning journey to fulfill their personal needs and personal interest. And another fundamental pillar of self-direction is managing the learning process, basically regulating the learning activities and task performance. Thus, in this particular study, we want to look at what are the relative contribution of personal interest and self-regulation to learners' engagement in self-directed technological experience. What we find is that learners' interest in pursuing their personal interest in English positively predict their information-oriented technological activities and entertainment-oriented activities, whereas self-regulation contributes to instruction-oriented, information-oriented, and socialization-oriented activity. So we conclude that self-regulation was a significant determinant of learners' engagement in technological activities that demands more cognitive efforts and investment, whereas learners' interest in pursuing their personal interest in English not only directly predict their self-directed out-of-class technological activity, but also mediated the influence of their interest in the language in general. Thus, this study suggests that another important role that teachers need to play is to promote and foster and support students' ability of using digital resources to pursue their personal interest, basically to engage in interest-driven informal technological experience. Thus, those study highlights that an important role teacher needs to play is to focus on supporting students' interest-driven, diversified, and strategic interaction with technological resources so as to boost learners' informal digital learning. Now, another direction to conceptualize teachers' role in interfacing formal and informal learning is bridging activities, basically teachers' pedagogical activities to connect students in class and out-of-class learning experience. Now, researchers have put forth various propositions in how teachers can connect students in class and out-of-class learning. Now, some propose integrating informal learning attributes into in-class learning. By informal learning attributes, basically interest-driven, product-oriented, social focused, and collaborative in nature, experiential learning, etc. Such as Socket and Tofeli, they basically argue that tasks in daily life is problem solving, right? So if teachers, when they construct their in-class learning around cognitively meaningful tasks, basically problem-solving tasks, it may prepare the students to be able to perform similar tasks in their daily life. Furthermore, Benson 2016 argued that maybe the teachers need to leave some space in their curriculum to allow learners to follow their individual interests and purposes, scaffold students to set up self-determined goals to fulfill those individual interests and purposes, guide the students towards resources and activities to meet those goals. So by integrating those informal learning attributes into the language in-class instruction, it may help connect or enhance the transferability of in-class and out-of-class learning. Other scholars conceptualize connection between in-class and out-of-class learning through this approach of coordination, coordinating the language skill set, coordinating the strengths of in-class and out-of-class learning. Now, Soken and Tofili argue that, as we have observed, most of the time, students' informal digital experience centers around receptive activity, basically reading and listening. He said, since informal activity mostly involve listening and rarely involve speaking, it is reasonable to explore whether it is relevant to teach listening comprehension in today's English classroom, whether course design should instead allow more time for speaking or writing activity. So they argue that maybe as a teacher, we can assign those receptive activities as out-of-class activity, but then center the in-class instruction around discussion, debating, and using the information they retrieve from this receptive activity for productive purposes. And other researcher highlights coordinating the strengths of in-class and out-of-class learning. They talk about the strengths of in-class learning lies in the meta-linguistic talk, the meta-cognitive talk. So, for example, Hafler et al., they shared a project where learners were asked to find examples of new media communication that they themselves have participated in, such as instant messaging, blog wiki, multimedia online playing game. And then in class, they engage the students to do discourse analysis on those artifacts so as to develop learners' meta-linguistic knowledge relevant to those online interactions. Godwin-Jones 2019 also introduced a project where intermediate level students curate, share, and evaluate authentic online materials in the target language. And then based on those that received the highest peer rating, they transformed them into interactive learning materials and share as open educational resources. And studies have been shown that when teachers proactively engage in pedagogical activities to bridge in-class and out-of-class learning, it benefits students' language development. For example, Home 2020 found that when teachers incorporate students' personal interest in assignment, it boosts students' interest in learning the language and enhance their in-class participation. Other researchers find that when teachers engage students in meta-linguistic analysis of language using authentic online social spaces and supporting them with simulated practices, it boosts their social pragmatic awareness, cyber pragmatics, and bolster their intention for informal digital practices. Thus, it is important for teachers to engage in this kind of pedagogical activities that consciously connect students in class and out of class learning. Now, do teachers do this? How do teachers engage in or utilize the bridging potential of technology to connect those two learning experiences? Schertz and Sanquivitz 2020, they surveyed over 500 English language teachers across 4 countries in Europe. And they find that those teachers converge in terms of their perceived importance of connecting extramural English and English language teaching. However, the teachers study to diverge in terms of their pedagogical practices in bringing extramural materials into their language classroom. They further diverged in terms of their adjustment of instructional activities or instructional content to compensate for what's lacking in the informal extramural language use. Thus, the researchers conclude that teachers' digital bridging activity may vary depending on the linguistic and social cultural context. So pedagogical activity that bridge in-class and out-of-class learning are essential, and the teacher play a very important role to bridge students in class and out-of-class learning, and their bridging activity are subject to the influence of various factors. So far, I have walked you through various studies in this field. Now, what do we take away? To conclude, first of all, those studies have showed that learners' informal digital experience do contribute to their language development. Thus, self-directed language learning with technology beyond the classroom deserves attention in language education practice and language education research. Furthermore, those studies showed teachers have a very important role to play. Teachers' role lies in supporting informal digital engagement through fostering language learning beliefs and mindsets that are facilitative of those informal digital experience, and also encouraging and supporting interest-driven, diversified, and strategic interaction with digital resources. Teachers' role also lies in engaging in pedagogical initiatives that connect students in class and out of class language learning. And those are the references that this talk is based on. And thank you very much for listening, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lai, for the great talk. It's very insightful. So now it's Q&A session. Can you type your questions to Q&A? Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I think I walked you through quite a few research in this field. It might be overwhelming, but we can discuss any issue related to a pedagogical issue or a research issue. So any question are welcome.
So then maybe I can start with a simple question.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. We all know now the digital technologies are embedded in our lives, and informal learning is very important. Just now, you've already talked about how to leverage the ways of interaction with the resources outside the classroom. However, sometimes it's really very hard for us, for the teachers to design a good learning activity that can really help students learn in informal learning settings, especially for young learners. So can you give us some suggestions for young learners in formal learning? How can we develop their self-regulated learning skills? Do you have any examples? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think teacher actually have different layers of role that they can play. Some of layer might be very simple. It's just a simple gesture of showing how they interact, and some layers may require the revolution of the curriculum. Now I talk about the simple layer. So for example, nowadays, I think it's a common phenomenon for even primary school teachers to play songs inside the language classroom, right? Now, a lot of times when the teachers play the songs, what do they do? Basically, they play the songs at the beginning of the class or during the recess to motivate the students, to have fun, to help students relax. Now, what I'm suggesting is that for songs, even though you just allocate, say, 5 minutes within your class, playing the songs inside the classroom, show students how you search for the song and show the process of locating the resources might actually stimulate students to locate similar songs that they can access beyond the classroom, and also bring the songs inside the classroom. Just focus on one, say, several lyrics, several lines of lyric, and engaging students to highlight the word they don't understand, and then show them what kind of word inferencing strategy that they can use to guess the meaning of the word. I think that could lower students' affective filter level in terms of accessing the authentic materials. So this is one simple example. It doesn't involve the change of language learning curriculum at all. It's just a small gesture. And another example is that I think nowadays, a lot of language teachers engage our students to read, right? We engage students to read outside the classroom. Now, what do teachers often do? A lot of times teachers either rely on say a reading platform where students can go to the reading platform to select the particular piece of reading that they're interested to read. And other teachers may just assign a set of book titles to the students to read. However, as we just realize that self-directed learning rests on two pillars. One is self-regulation, one is personal interests, right? And then when you assign the reading for students to read, although even if you ask them to select based on their interest, it's not personal interest. Students may not interested in what they are reading that you assign to them. Now, how about changing this kind of free voluntary reading in a way where you engage students just to read anything they want? Just say every day, 5 minutes, read for 5 minutes, and then share what you read online. It could be a recipe they're interested in. They want to make a food. It could be a story. It could be how to play Go chess because they want to develop this hobby. So just assign this kind of free voluntary reading around students' personal interest might make a difference because that builds students' confidence in using the second language to pursue something that they are interested in their daily life, to connect the language learning with their personal habits, their personal hobby, their personal interest. That would tremendously expand students' potential of learning the language on their own beyond the classroom. So I think those were two examples of where even just a small gesture by the teachers might make a big impact on students' learning experience and the richness of the learning experience. So
thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for giving these two examples. They are very, very useful for the language teachers and also it's very useful for me. Thank you very much. And we have some questions. The first question is, what difficulties do learners face in investigating their own language use? I imagine teaching learners discourse analytic method isn't easy.
Okay. Yeah, I think learners encounter various difficulties or challenges in informal technological use. I think this lies in different layers. It lies in the language, the linguistic challenge. It also lies in their cognitive challenge in terms of self-regulation. Now, how can they persevere and set their own goal and regulate the learning process? I think those are all challenges. And also another level of challenge is what kind of technological resources that are appropriate to them. So all those were the challenges that students were facing. So as the teacher, supporting students' informal digital experiences, you cannot just look at one aspect. Basically, the teacher has multiple roles to play. One role is to make sure students have access to the appropriate technological resources that fit their language proficiency. And another aspect is to help students develop the meta-linguistic and meta-cognitive strategies. Now, by meta-cognitive strategies, I mean word inferencing strategy, comprehension strategy when you encounter linguistic difficulty, and how to use communication strategies to overcome the communication difficulties in a second language. All those were cognitive strategies that teachers need to support the students with. Yes, discourse analysis is difficult, but here, in that particular study, it was in the adult, in the university classroom setting. But then when you are working with the primary school students or secondary school students, you may not look at discourse analytical method. You may analyze the language, look at, say, engage students to use corpus tool to put in a particular authentic material and see what kind of vocabulary appears very frequently, accumulate this vocabulary to help them prepare for interacting with the technological resource is also one possible way to go. So basically, teacher needs to guide students to analyze the languages that were used in those settings to prepare them for using the language, or how they greet each other on social media. Are those greeting methods different from the greeting in daily life? All of those were pragmatic information that you can help your students to acquire. So those were the cognitive and linguistic aspects of preparation. And then on the top of that, there is also this aspect of metacognitive support in terms of supporting students' self-regulation. How to help your students develop the self-regulation skills that they can set realistic, concrete goals and then monitor the fulfillment of the goals, adjust their strategy. All those were the things that teachers need to do at the same time in order to ensure that learners can engage effectively in the informal digital spaces. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but if you if I didn't, you can continue with follow-up
Yes,
questions.
yeah. So, and thank you very much for this to address that question in much depth and very both practically and theoretically. Now we have some questions in chat room as well. So let's take turns. Let's go back to the chat. There is a question. Hi, Professor Lai. Thank you for your highly informative presentation. I've read much of your research and believe that most of your findings remain applicable to the current informal learning environment. Considering the rapid advancements in AI in recent years, I'm curious about your insights into two related questions. How is AI technology currently shaping and impacting informal learning? And second question is, what implications do these AI-driven changes have for self-directed language learning?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Is it Belly? Bella. Thank you, Bella, for the question. And yeah, I think if I put it in one simple sentence, I think generative AI basically challenges us to rethink about education, especially rethink about language education, because it challenges us to rethink about what's the role of language teachers. If people can do bilingual translation very easily, access resources very easily through generative AI in their native language, then what's the purpose of learning a second language, right? So it actually challenged teachers to rethink, if we still focus on the linguistic forms or still focus on the linguistic knowledge, does that really serve the purpose for language learning in this generative AI era? Now, when you think about the AI technology, their role in shaping and impacting informal language learning, basically AI serves as a tool, right? It's a cognitive tool which helps the learners to lower the linguistic hurdle of interacting with informal digital resources. Now, AI also serves as a companion, right? Because you can chat with AI even when you feel discouraged, or when you feel hard to regulate your emotion to overcome the difficulty in the informal learning context. AI could serve as a learning companion. It could also serve as a assistant, which help you with strategies to interact with the resources that you encounter in the informal learning context. The cognitive strategies, what kind of strategy you can use to lower the linguistic barriers. So anyway, AI technology, I think, is augmenting, even it is pushing this kind of move of language education away from classroom learning towards informal learning. It's actually making this transition even faster, and it challenged the language teachers to really think about how to flip the coin, how to use in-class learning to serve learners' language use purposes beyond the classroom. So I think it plays a very important role, even highlights the importance of informal learning. It simply enables students to use language to pursue their personal interest. You think about it in this way, for beginners, a lot of times they are not using English to pursue a personal interest because they feel that authentic language is not for them, right? But then with the AI, you can think about AI can give them, just type the prompt. What are the commonly appeared vocabularies on English recipes, on egg tart, for example? And then the AI can generate a list of vocabularies from the authentic resources that prepares them, even for beginners who can build this confidence and accumulate the relevant language to pursue their personal interest in English. So I think, yeah, just putting one word, I think it's basically even push this movement faster or forward with the generative AI. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have quite a few questions and time is almost up, but maybe we can address some of them briefly. Is it okay, Dr. Lai? Are you okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, Donald, I have another question. Shall we answer his question later? Let's come to Shane, don't know, maybe it's a lady. She asked the one question already. So let's move on to the second. Ying, Ying Luo. Her question is, Dr. My name is Ying. I have a quick question. I'm wondering how exactly do we define informal learning? I'm doing research in English lessons in TikTok, which is a type of instructor-centered class facing the whole internet of learners. Would that be considered as informal learning too, or is informal learning does not necessarily require an instructor? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ino, for this question. Sorry, I didn't make it very clear at the beginning of the slide. So basically, when we talk about informal learning, we talk about learner-initiated, learner-directed learning experience. So it could be intentional learning experience. It could be incidental learning. So basically, the key is that the agent is not the teacher. The agent is the learner. Learner initiate this learning process. So that's what we mean by informal learning. Actually, in the literature, people are talking about in any learning situation, there are elements of informal and formal learning. Formal and informal learning basically is a continuum. It's a continuum of the elements of self-initiating and self-regulation. So when I talk about informal learning beyond, say, informal learning with technological resources, I focus more on learners' self-initiated, self-directed use of everyday technological resources for language learning beyond the classroom. So that's how I define informal learning. And then when you talk about, yes, it could be with the presence of instructors. If, for example, I'm using vocab app for instruction-oriented informal learning. It's more for engaging informal experience for the deliberate purpose, for the intentional purpose of learning the language. Or it could be without the presence of instructor, or without presence of a structure. Say, for example, watching movies, watching TV series as an incidental way of learning the language through exposure to the language. So is that clear? Yeah, you can
Maybe
follow
we
up
can
if
go
it's not
back.
clear.
If she has questions, then
Yes.
she can write to you and to learn more from you.
Yes.
And we have another question from Shi Hui in the chat. Dr. Lai, thank you very much for your great presentation. As you mentioned, technology can facilitate language learning inside and also outside classroom. As a language learner, may I ask for your advice or suggestions on selecting technology tools, platforms to facilitate language learning? Do we need to pay any attention to anything considering their reliability, usefulness, etc.? Thank you.
Okay, Shui, thank you for the question. If I were to give advice, I wouldn't advise specific technological tool platform. My advice would be follow your interest. Just think about what you are interested in your daily life, anything that you are interested in, and then coordinate different technological resources to help you pursue your personal interest with the informal resources. For example, if your interest is in, say, cooking, okay, or say losing weight, you want to do weight control, and then just use different types of technological tools, say go to generative AI, ChatGPT, ask for recommendation of resources on weight control that were appropriate for second language learner or beginners. Okay, and follow the resources that were advised by the Gen AI, and then by using other tools such as a dictionary to help you process information. So, basically, to put it in a simple word, I think for informal learning to be sustainable, making it connect with what you really are interested in and really want to pursue in your daily life, and then that would make this journey more sustainable than just focus on more instruction-oriented technological resources. Yeah, so that's my response.
Thank you. And another question is, hi, congratulations. I'm from Jen Colors. Okay, and she said, I was wondering if it has some considerable impact on the order in developing the following abilities, like first listening activities, then writing, then speaking, and finally reading, or working them together?
Thank you. Thank you for this question. I think different people have different belief in language learning. Now, personally, I believe in holistic language learning. I believe that language is learned in an integrative way where people use it to fulfill social function. Now, if you think about it in that way, then the language skills are actually integrated. They develop simultaneously to fulfill social function. So I don't believe in starting with one skill first and then move on to the next skill. I think it's all taking place at the same time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The last question is from the Shane Donut. She asked, just now you mentioned teacher beliefs, right? And she mentioned, do some more traditionally minded teachers feel resistant to inverting classroom instruction to take into account how students engage with the target language outside class? I'm aware of teachers who regard using music and lyrics as being entertainment and not learning at all.
Yeah, very good observation, very accurate observation as well. I think that's why exactly I'm delivering this webinar. I think one way to change the teacher's mindset is basically to buy in, to win their buy-in by showing them the evidence, all those empirical arguments and the curriculum arguments in support of the benefits of out-of-class resources for students' language development. Once you share those resources with the teachers, they may be able to understand it's not just for pure entertainment. It actually conveys more than entertainment, has its learning benefits or learning potential. So I think the starting point would be get them buy-in through showing all those evidences, and then guide them step by step, starting with small. Do not jump totally to bridging activities where you totally change the curriculum, but just to start with small steps, like we shared just now with Dr. Song's question, in terms of just a small change of your reading program, a small change of how you make use of the music, and that may make an impact that you couldn't imagine on your learners. So I think it would be gain their buy-in, but then at the same time engage them in experiential learning with small steps at first. And then I think that would gradually move them towards a more progressive approach towards integrating informal learning resource into the classroom. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lai, for the great talk and also the resourceful responses. We learned a lot from you. That's marvelous.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. We overrun already, but let's join me to give her a big applause. Maybe we can't hear you, but I am on behalf of them. Thank you very much. So our next, this is the next talk, and please conduct the survey after the talk. Thank you. The survey should be, please scan this QR code to conduct the survey. Thank you very much. So if you have burning questions, please contact Dr. Lai.